Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you are brand new here, my name is Diana and I'm a watercolor artist and a work from home mom. In today's video, I'm going to be covering 3 different watercolor paper and what I personally would use them for. If you've always wanted to try watercolor painting but don't know what type of paper to get, or maybe you've been painting for a while but are curious to see what other paper types are out there, then I'm going to show you, like I said, 3 different papers that we'll experiment on today live, so you can see exactly how they interact, how the paints glide on paper, if it's good for wet on wet painting. All the things we'll cover it inside this video. Now, paper is one of those things that you don't want to skimp out on because the quality does matter. That doesn't mean that you have to buy the most expensive paper every single time. You'll actually see which paper I like to use for spot illustrations, which means illustrations that don't have a background, versus what type of paper I will use for a full landscape painting that has all the background, adds a ton of water, all the things. You can also mix and match your papers depending on what you're working on. For example, you can use a different paper when you're practicing versus the final project that you're working on. You can kind of change it up and pick and choose your paper based on what you are wanting. Okay, without further ado, let's get into the different paper types. So here are the 3 different watercolor paper pads that we will be comparing today. First is the Fabriano Studio Watercolor Cold Press. This comes usually in a pad with 50 sheets, which is the most, and it's 25% cotton. It typically costs $26.62, which comes out to about 53 cents per sheet. And then we have the Saunders Waterford paper, St Cuthberts mill, and this one is actually 100% cotton, which is super impressive. This one only comes with 20 sheets, and at the price point of $29.99 for a 9x12 pad, that would come out to $1.50 per, which is significantly more expensive than the Fabriano cold press paper. And then the creme de la creme of all of the watercolor paper is going to be your Arches. This comes in a sheet, a paper pad of 20 sheets, and it costs $43.15, which comes out to $2.15 per. So this is 100% cotton, and the texture of it is really lovely. Again, I'll show you this in just a second. Here are the 3 papers before we get started on putting watercolor on it. I wanted to kind of show you the color difference. You can see that Fabriano is going to be your brightest white. St. Cuthberts is going to be your more yellowy, dull in color, and then Arches is somewhere in between. So I'm going to go ahead and take some artist tape to secure them down in place. Okay, first we're going to try out the Fabriano cold press paper. I am going to see how well the colors work together. So I'm going to first pick up my red and paint a red circle. I want them to bleed into each other, the colors to bleed into each other, so I'm going to keep it pretty wet. Okay. And then I'm going to remove that and then pick up yellow and see if the red will bleed into the yellow. Let's see how they interact. Okay, so it looks like the yellow is definitely heading over to the red. Okay, and then I'm gonna work quickly here, remove that, and then put in blue to see how that works. So again, I am going to paint the circle before I let them touch. Oh no, it splashed a little bit over there, but that's okay. All right, look at that. The yellow's bleeding into the red as well. I don't see a ton of buckling in the watercolor paper so far, so that's good. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to blending. Let's see how it blends together. I wanna try a complementary color to see how they look when they blend together on this paper. You can see that the yellow is moving into the purple as well, so the yellow really likes to move around. Okay, now I'm going to try a fun technique where I'm going to wet the paper first using a wider flat brush for this. All right, I went ahead and wet the paper, and now we're just gonna drop in some colors to see what happens. So you can see that the red is only moving in the area that is wet and not going towards where it's dry, obviously. I like to drop the colors not like right next to each other so they can kind of move on their own and blend together as they want. Even though it's only 25% cotton, I feel like it holds water pretty well. Okay, so it's already started to dry here. So it's not gonna really move a ton. So we're gonna do the exact same exercise on the St Cuthberts paper. I'm gonna start out with my red circle. Curious to see how the water holds on this paper because it's not super textured. So I'm curious to see what it would look like once they blend together. It moves really beautifully. Okay, and then let's try the blue. Okay, so far I'm noticing that they look really smooth when it blends out, when the yellow blends out. I think it looks quite nice. I'm curious to see how it's gonna dry. Okay, next we're gonna do the complementary colors just to see how they blend together. This one on the left side didn't really blend super well, but I'm gonna try a different complementary color combination this time. So I'll try red and green. Wow, look at that. That is so cool. Okay, so I'm just gonna let that work. I don't want to let the green get in there too, so. Okay, I don't want to touch it too much. Okay, so I'll let it stop there. And then we're gonna do that fun wet on wet exercise. All right, I'm gonna try to kind of follow the pattern of what I did before by kind of doing a rainbow theme color. I feel like the yellow looks significantly less bright on this paper for some reason. I'm not totally sure why. But it's the same yellow that I'm using. It's not blending, it's not moving outwards a ton. I have to really push it in order for it to move around. I'm gonna try forcing this one to blend a little bit more by pushing it into the other colors. So it looks like there's a little bit more blending going on right there. One thing I noticed is that it is starting to dry right here, but overall I feel like the paper has kept the water on a little bit longer than this one. At least that's what it looks like to me. By the time I had done the purple, this was completely dry, so I couldn't even add water to it. So it does seem like this one holds water a little bit better. Okay, I'm really excited about this one. This is the Arches paper. Let's go ahead and start with our circles. I feel like when I paint on this texture, because it's more rough, I have to kind of push in the brush a little bit more, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because I love this kind of raw looking, imperfect raw edge. The yellow looks more vibrant on this paper compared to St Cuthberts. Again, I'm not totally sure why. It's definitely moving into the red. And let's go ahead and add the blue. All right, so it looks like it's starting to blend out quite a bit on this side. So we're gonna let that go by itself. Let's do our complementary color exercise. I'm gonna do orange and blue this time. So I don't know if you can see this, but when I have to push my paintbrush down a little bit more, and you can see that compared to the other two paper, it's really leaving this kind of scratchy look at the edge, and I really, really love that actually. I personally like that, but again, it really depends on what you are going for. And let's add the blue. I almost feel like I need to add a little bit more water on this paper because of the scratchiness. Look at that. That's super pretty. The texture of the paper just really pops. It's really doing this interesting waving, like woven look, weaving. I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's really pretty. But I think it's super interesting because the Arches and the Fabriano both have a more textured look on the top, and so it really pops through in these moments. And then for our last exercise, we're gonna get the paper nice and wet and see how the colors look on a wet surface. So if you can see, there's these like veiny edges. I think because of the texture, you can see it right here as well. I don't remember seeing this with the other two. A little bit on the Fabriano, but definitely not as much. I think this paper would be really lovely to use for like a full landscape painting, just because of the way that it looks when it's fully covered. Whereas the Fabriano, I think, could work really well for spot illustrations. I actually use that paper all of the time, and it works great for me. Oh, wow. That really is spreading out. I feel like this is like a science experiment. Watercolor is so cool. I really do feel like all of the papers, the outcome looks so different, which is so fun. And you will have this even with, you know, the same paper sometimes. And that is the beauty of watercolor. And I know that some people don't love that because, you know, sometimes the outcome is a bit of a surprise. And as you get comfortable with the paper, you'll know how to control it a little bit more, manipulate it, and get it to how you want it to look. But I personally think that the free flow and kind of variety in watercolor and the surprise that you get really is what makes watercolor so cool. Okay, so yeah, it's still very wet. I actually put the least amount of water on this one because I really wanted to test how well it can hold the water. And when I look to the side, it's definitely wet and still easy to, you can still manipulate it since it's wet. Now that all of our painting exercises are done, let's compare the final outcome. So here's the Fabriano watercolor paper. You can see that there are some areas where it blended smooth and some areas that did not, which tell me that the paper dries differently in different spots, if that makes sense. So depending on how it dries, it will have different results. I do think this watercolor paper is really, really good for the price point, and would highly recommend using it for spot illustrations and even final projects. Definitely for practices, I think it's really great. However, if you want a more consistent finish for a full painting, like a landscape painting or something like that, I would probably not use the Fabriano. Second here is St Cuthberts. I think this is actually really beautiful and clean. The blending is pretty smooth for the most part. You can see how smooth the red and yellow turned out. And overall, I think the blending looks really soft. If this is what you're going for and want something a little bit more flat, kind of like a cold press paper, then I think this one would work really, really well for you. This would also work really great for something graphic or something with lettering on it because it has a smoother finish. And then finally we have our Arches paper. I love this paper so much. I really wish I didn't because of the price point. So I would save this definitely for final paintings. Once you've kind of practiced it on the side with your Fabriano paper, maybe reach out for your Arches. And again, you would ideally use this for something that requires a lot of water, so landscape paintings, nature scenes, and things like that. You can see just how beautiful it blended really, really well. And I really love the raw edges. If you want to have a little bit more of a cleaner look, I would not recommend this paper just because it is so textured, but it is very beautiful depending on what type of project you are working on. All right, and that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this video and got a better sense and an idea of what to look for when you're out shopping for your watercolor paper. As you can see, you don't have to get the most expensive paper. It really depends on what you are working on, what type of project you're working on. So I hope that this video gave you more insight on what to buy. Beyond watercolor paper, if you are curious on what type of watercolor brushes or paints or even calligraphy supplies that I would recommend, I actually have an art supply guide for you down below, and it includes all of the links so you don't have to go ahead and search for them. You can just click it and it'll take you right to the item. I hope you find it helpful. Again, it's down in the descriptions below. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe so you can get more video like this. If you have any questions or want to see something next, then feel free to leave it down in the comments below, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!